everyone, I'm Victoria. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe before we get started, and if you learn anything from this video, please give it a thumbs up or share it with somebody who may be able to. So what are we even talking about today? I've been getting a lot of requests lately to do a video about mast cell activation syndrome or mast cell activation disorder and histamine intolerance. I was diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome, MCAS, about a year ago, and really started treatment about 9 months ago at this point for it. So this is still a pretty new diagnosis for me, and I'm still learning a lot and learning about it in general, but people have kept asking me to do a video on what I do know so far, so I'm doing that today. I'm going to share what I've learned so far, mostly what I've learned from my doctors, my own personal experience. I've also read Dr. Afrin's book, Never Bet Against Occam. He's like a mast cell specialist, so he wrote a whole book about mast cells, and I've read this entire thing. And then I also recently listened to a webinar. I attended a webinar by someone of the name of Billy Shellist. She is a functional diagnostic nutritionist. She's actually also out of Colorado. She works with a lot of patients remotely, has a history with Lyme and mold, understands all of that. So it was a really informative webinar for me. And I'll also leave all her information in the description box in case you want to check her out and maybe work with her. She's very well informed about mast cell, and so my goal today is not to repeat her whole webinar because that would be long, one, and two, not fair to her. So I'm trying to combine all the information from all these different sources into what I'm presenting today, and then leave links and contact info and whatever for whoever may be useful and helpful. So I'm going to go over what mast cell is, symptoms, treating, and testing. So I have all my notes here because it's a lot of information that I don't want to forget. But please remember, keep in mind, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical practitioner of any sort. What I'm sharing today, again, is just what I've learned, what I know, what I've picked up from other people, my personal experiences. I'm no way sharing diagnostic information or telling you what you should and shouldn't do. Always talk with your doctor and or a professional to figure out what is going to be the best for you. So first things first is, let's just even talk about what mast cells are. So mast cells are actually part of your immune system. Everybody has mast cells in their body. They protect against infection, and they are also part of the inflammatory response, which you might think, oh my gosh, that sounds horrible, but some inflammation is good because it alerts the immune system that there's an issue that needs attention. It's the chronic inflammation that becomes a problem. So what is mast cell activation syndrome or mast cell activation disorder? And I'm going to define that against what mastocytosis is and what histamine intolerance is, because those are three separate things. So the first one I'm going to start with is mastocytosis, which is when the body makes too many mast cells. So mast cells originate in your bone marrow. So when your bone marrow is essentially overproducing mast cells, and you have to have a bone marrow biopsy to get this diagnosis. It's very rare to have mastocytosis, far more rare than mast cell activation syndrome itself, and it is usually a genetic issue that is causing your body to overproduce these mast cells. Mast cell activation syndrome, on the other hand, which is what I have, is actually much more common than I think the medical community is even currently aware of. Dr. Afrin talks about that a lot in his book. My own doctors have talked a lot about that. I have seen it in just the world. Mast cell activation syndrome or disorder is an increased degranulation or an overactive release of inflammatory mediators. So your body is, essentially how I think about it is, your body is like overreacting and thinking like everything needs to be, like your immune system's almost overreacting or reacting to things it doesn't need to be reacting to. And then you have, the last one is histamine intolerance, and this is where the amount of histamine is more than what the body can break down. So histamine intolerance is different than mast cell activation syndrome because mast cells release a whole host of different types of mediators, and one of those is histamine. And so histamine intolerance is where that's the only thing that's being overproduced, where mast cell activation syndrome is like any of these other mediators can also be being released. Histamine intolerance is generally caused by genetics. It's usually a mutation on the DAO gene or the HNMT And both of these play a role in breaking down histamine. So usually you're either not breaking it down or you're overproducing it. Or you have an increase in the amount of bacteria in your gut especially that produce histamine and not enough of the bacteria that break it down. So histamine tolerance is solely related to histamine. Mast cell activation syndrome is related to all the mediators, which I'll go over in a minute, that come from mast cells. There are a variety of mutations that are associated with mastocytosis, mast cell activation syndrome. Dr. Afrin in his book talks a lot about this, and he also talks a lot about how they're still trying to figure out all the genetic mutations, and he's seen in a lot of patients like some variations, and so I'm not going to get into that because it gets really complicated and confusing, and I don't think it's important for today. If you're working with a professional with like a really extreme case, genetic testing might be appropriate then, but it's not my expertise or forte for this video. All right, let's talk about symptoms, because I get this question constantly, like, what are mast cell symptoms? What are your mast cell symptoms? And this is where it gets really confusing, especially if you're dealing with a chronic illness or a number of chronic illnesses, because anything can be a mast cell symptom, essentially, because mast cells are present in every tissue of your body, so they can produce almost any symptom. You can get things like rashes and flushing and skin stuff. You can get a lot of cardiovascular symptoms, heart palpitations, low blood pressure, that sort of fun stuff. You can get a lot of neurological symptoms or cognitive symptoms, headaches, brain fog, dizziness, any of your typical allergy symptoms, you know, itchy eyes, runny nose, like that sort of things. Mast cells are what are associated with allergic reactions. So that also means things like throat closing, anaphylaxis too. Like classic allergic symptoms that you think of are mast cell related. But if you're obviously getting them all the time into things that aren't necessary to be getting an allergic reaction to, that's an issue and could be a signal of mast cell. GI issues are a huge one. Your GI tract contains the greatest number of mast cells. So a lot of people with mast cell activation syndrome end up with a lot of GI symptoms, which is big for me. Bladder and like menstrual related symptoms like interstitial cystitis, endometriosis, really bad PMS, pelvic pain, that sort of thing. And then fatigue. Fatigue is a huge one because your body's either overreacting, or you think about when you get allergies, it's just exhausting when your immune system is like fighting all the time. Mast cells also play a huge role in contributing to leaky gut or the inability to heal leaky gut. Again, like I said, lots of mast cells in your digestive tract, so that's, you know, if they're constantly releasing histamine, and then it's a whole thing, you know, like you're causing damage to your gut constantly, or you're reacting constantly to everything you eat. It's really hard to heal leaky gut without addressing the mast cell issue. And so this is where it gets confusing, because for me, for so many years, I was like, oh, well, these are Lyme symptoms, and these are Lyme symptoms, and I have a hard time differentiating, like, what's a Lyme symptom, what's a flare-up of that, you know, versus what is like a mast cell symptom. At this point, we think most of my symptoms are mast cell because they don't have, like, they're very chronic in a sense that I don't really have like typical Lyme symptoms or co-infection symptoms anymore. Like, I just deal with a lot of fatigue. I'm very sensitive, like I'm very chemically sensitive. I'm very just like a sensitive person in general. I like really react to anything that's different in my environment. I have really bad allergies. And then I have a lot of food intolerances. And then one thing I want to say that's, I think, been the most interesting thing for me to learn is, like I mentioned, symptoms can relate to, for women, like your pelvic region and female parts. And for me, when I started addressing mast cells and lowered my diet to a low histamine diet, or changed my diet to a low histamine diet, my PMS and pelvic pain dramatically reduced. I've been diagnosed with endometriosis, and I really don't get a lot of those symptoms anymore since addressing my mast cell issues. That has calmed down that area so much. So it's made a huge impact, and I think that is really overlooked. I really don't think that gynecologists are aware about mast cells at all. And I think a lot of women who deal with endometriosis need to look into mast cells. That's my personal opinion, because, you know, it's made a huge difference for me. That's my personal experience. I'm not going to say that's true for everybody, but I think they do play a role. The research I've done on endometriosis is very much immune system related, which is also a neglected piece of endometriosis in the medical community. That's a whole nother video. But anyways, just wanted to throw that out there. So people will say, what are your symptoms? Like I just said, deal with a lot of fatigue. I'm a lot of GI issues, very sensitive to like everything, including lots of foods, any environmental changes, chemicals, extremely sensitive to, mold sensitive, and then a lot of the like pelvic pain and cramps and PMS type of stuff. So again, symptoms can be almost anything, and I think if you think it's like a Lyme related thing or related to whatever chronic illness you're dealing with, and you've treated and used all those treatments and it hasn't gone anywhere, mast cells may be something to look into. So how do you even test for mast cells? Testing is actually, it's sort of straightforward and sort of complicated because this is a relatively newer thing. A lot of doctors don't understand how to test properly. You don't just test histamine levels. So I have this list here, so I'm gonna look down at it because it's a lot. So you're gonna test how to best get tested. You want serum levels of tryptase, chromogranin A, a whole blood histamine, interleukins 4, 5, and 13. And then you also want to check heparin, prostaglandin D2, and N-methylhistamine. You also want urine, 24-hour urine for the prostaglandin D2 and N-methylhistamine. Most doctors don't do that. All these samples need to be, especially for the heparin and prostaglandin, need to be frozen after drawn. Best if frozen or after drawn and then tested from that frozen sample, which most labs don't do. They just draw it and then it like sits in the lab, and then maybe a day later it gets sent to where it's going to be tested. So this is why a lot of times people can't get that positive test, because the lab is not doing it properly. So you either need to work with a doctor who like knows a lab that knows how to do the testing properly, or you might have to do multiple rounds of testing. When I went into the lab, I was like, you must freeze this. My doctor wrote it on the form, and it was like so complicated because the lab was like, yeah, we know what we're doing. And I was like, you need to freeze this, and they were like, okay. And I could tell that they weren't going to do it, and I literally just the whole time she was drawing my blood, I was like, you need to freeze this, you need to freeze this. So that's a really key part. That's why testing can be really tricky, is because basically what happens is if it's not frozen, these levels can degrade, and then you're not getting an accurate value of what came out of your body, which is also why you might need to test multiple times, because you may not be in a flare. Your levels may not be high when you get tested, and they might be at another point. Dr. Afrin says this a lot, is to get tested when you're like, take the blood work with you, and then go when you feel like you're in a flare-up, and get tested when you're feeling the worst. My doctor was like, flare yourself before you get tested. I've had multiple doctors tell me that, because you want to try and get that positive test if they're suspecting that, and then you want to make sure it's related to those mast cell mediators and not like something else that's causing that flare-up. And then clinically, they can diagnose mast cell, or they use part of this for diagnosing mast cells. You're just a highly sensitive person. You react to everything. Hello. You like struggle to tolerate treatment. So like if you're really sensitive to any treatment you're doing for any other illness or health related issues, you have a lot of food reactions and food intolerances. That's a big key. And then one way is they'll give you the basic H1, H2 blockers, which I'll discuss in a moment, and see if you react positively to that. And that could be a big indicator that those treatments are helping mediate your mast cells and that mast cell is an issue for you. Let's talk about treatment. So first of all, mastocytosis treatment is different. You need the kinase inhibitors. I'm not focusing on that because that's different. Like I said, I'm focused on mast cell activation syndrome today. Finding a professional who understands mast cell activation syndrome is so difficult because this is just like not as well known. And unfortunately, I don't really have like great resources to tell you like where or how to find these doctors. The best thing I think you can do is ask around in your area. Take the things that I said and be like, this is what I want tested, and they may not even know how to treat it. So, you know, working with someone remotely who understands mast cell may be what you need to do. But the first big thing is that to actually overcome mast cell, you're gonna have to treat the root cause. So you're gonna have to figure out if that's Lyme, mold, viral issues, other infections, genetic mutations, dysbiosis, like SIBO or candida overgrowth. All of those things can contribute to mast cell, and you don't want to just treat the symptoms. You need to get to the root cause, right? So that you're not dealing with this for the rest of your life. But oftentimes we need to address the symptoms so that you can tolerate treatment, and also manage the symptoms so that you're not freaking miserable all the time, and can like get to that root cause and figure out what that is instead of just having this overreaction all the time. So obviously you want to make sure that you remove or you reduce your triggers as much as possible. You know, avoid the foods. You maybe want to do some food allergy or intolerance testing so you can avoid those foods for the time being, until you get your mast cells under control. You want to try and live a low toxin, low chemical lifestyle, so get rid of all the nasty chemicals in your life. Go for green alternatives to minimize those reactions. Get out of mold, big one. Again, like I said, with the food allergies, test for that, but a lot of times doctors advise putting people on a low histamine diet. I know for many of you it can be frustrating because it's another restriction. It was really frustrating for me, but it does, it makes a difference, which is like sort of frustrating. But I'll link a website with a low histamine food list for you. Two other big ones are lowering your EMF exposure and lowering your stress. Stress is a huge trigger for mast cell. It's a huge trigger for me. I've seen it with almost everybody I know with mast cell. Stress just triggers mast cells. Stress triggers everything. Stress is just a problem in general. So let's talk about H1, H2 blockers. Like I mentioned before, that's usually the first line of defense. Most doctors will put people on an H1, H2 blocker. These block histamine at the H1 and H2 receptors. So H1 blockers are your typical allergy meds that you think of: Benadryl, Zyrtec, Xyzal, Allegra, Claritin, that sort of thing. And then an H2 blocker are usually what we think of as antacids, like Zantac and omeprazole. So that will block the H1 and H2 receptors, and so it really reduces the amount of histamine that's reacting in your body. I struggle with H2 blockers because they're proton pump inhibitors, and that means decreased stomach acid, which will cause a whole host of other digestive issues. That's me personally. I don't take an H2 blocker because I don't need more digestive issues, and that can lead to SIBO, and that will just, you know, I think that can cause more problems in the long run and actually increase your histamine issue, your mast cell issue. But I also understand why doctors do it, and it may be important if you're having a ton of allergic reactions to take those first off, you know, H1, H2 blockers right away until you get everything under control. So those are H1, H2 blockers, and then there are some mast cell stabilizer medications, things like cromolyn and ketotifen. I take both of those. Cromolyn works in the GI tract. I take it before I eat, and it helps a lot. It has helped a lot with bloating and that sort of thing. Cromolyn is a prescription medication, and not all insurances cover it, and it's very expensive. Something else that I use and that you can use if you can't get a hold of it through your insurance is nasal chrome. This will focus. So you can actually order this online. You can get it at some pharmacies, like the natural pharmacies. Otherwise you can order on Amazon. I'll link it below. But this is like a nasal spray helps with allergies, but also you'll get that post nasal drip so you can get it into your gut. So I do my oral cromolyn and my nasal cromolyn before I eat. There are also a ton more drugs out there, and Dr. Avron uses like a variety of medications in his book, things that haven't even necessarily been approved for mast cell but work really well for mast cell. I'm not going to list all those, but if you're, you know, there are a ton of drugs. Those are just kind of the basics. Then there's also a lot of natural stuff that people use a lot, and I have a whole list here that I'm going to read for you. So things like quercetin, which is really well known for treating allergies as a natural alternative. For me, it flares me more. I don't know why. It doesn't work for me, but it works for a lot of people. Luteolin, pycnogyl, vitamin C, but you need to get a natural form of vitamin C, like from cassava root or a very pure source, because most people react to absorbic acid. Stinging nettle leaf. I drink stinging nettle tea every morning. Evening primrose oil, milk thistle, butterbur, feverview, L-theanine or GABA can help. Chondroitin sulfite, which I think is really helpful if you're dealing with bladder issues from mast cell. Licorice root and DGL, aloe vera, all great for the gut. And then DAO, which is a really common one. This breaks down histamine in the gut. For me personally, it flared my gut. It made my gut symptoms worse. And I think I had a discussion with people about this. I think it was because I don't think I have a mutation on the DAO gene. And so like I am breaking it down. So like that wasn't the issue with my gut. I'm unclear about that, but I've seen DAO. It's very commonly given to people with gut issues and mast cell, but I've seen it be a huge issue for large people and really helpful for others. So that's like a 50-50 hit or miss type of thing. So those are some of the natural antihistamines that can be used, and a lot of people prefer to take over medications. As most of you know, I like to try and do a natural supplementation over a medication, but I don't tolerate the natural stuff. And a lot of people with mast cell will react to herbals, like if they're trying to do herbal treatment for Lyme per se. And sometimes that can be the herb itself, and sometimes that can be like what it's in, like alcohol. And then the big thing is that you are trying to use the smallest amount necessary, like the lowest dose you can possibly get away with to calm your mast cell reactions. And then, you know, you up it from there if you need to. So the other confusing part about treatment that's really important to know is that a lot of people with mast cell will react to the fillers and medications and the dyes. And so when you are getting a medication, you need to either one, find a dye-free version of it, or find a pharmacy that has a dye-free version of it, or get it compounded. But there is a website, which I will link below, that you can go to and you can look up. So let's say your doctor prescribes you a medication for mast cell. What you want to do is you want to go to this website and, like, I'm just going to take a random medication, Zyrtec. It's not a prescription medication, but we're going to use it as an example. You're going to go to this website and you're going to type in Zyrtec to search the medication, and it will bring up all the manufacturers of that medication. You can click on a manufacturer and you can scroll down and click on ingredients, and it will show you if there's dye in it and what the other ingredients are. They're called excipients because a lot of patients react to the excipients in medications. So then you want to call your you want to find a manufacturer that's dye-free, and you want to call your pharmacy and say, hey, what's the manufacturer that you use? And also, if they say it's this one, it has dye, you ask, you know, can you get it from this manufacturer? I'm allergic to the dye. Oftentimes pharmacies are not very flexible and they can't, and so you have to kind of call other pharmacies and see who has a manufacturer that you are compatible with, which is frustrating, I know. Sometimes you can find a pharmacy in your area who like understands your situation and is nice and will order from the other manufacturer for you. So don't be afraid to talk to them about that. That's probably the most annoying part. This is the most frustrating part for me about having mast cell, is finding a dye-free drugs, because most pharmacies don't carry them. Or you have to, like, I have basically 3 pharmacies that I use because each one has a different manufacturer for different drugs. And then the other thing, then if you can't find one, you can always get drugs compounded, but obviously that's not always covered by insurance, so that can be a little frustrating. But the other thing is that, let's say you get a dye-free version and you still feel like you're reacting to it, then you have to go in and look at the other excipients. So does it have cornstarch, or are you reacting to the like microcrystalline cellulose? And you might need to like play with that, because it could be that little bit in the drug that you are reacting to mast cell wise, and so then you have to get a different manufacturer. For me, I typically do okay, I think, as long as it's dye free, whatever that drug is. And like I said, I'm gonna link that website below so you can like check it out and look up your drugs and find. And this is not just for mast cell drug, this is for any drug. So your doctor puts you on a prescription for thyroid medication, you know, you need to look that up, because it could be dye from any medication that you are reacting to. That goes for over-the-counter stuff too. So like for me, a lot of the H2 blockers like Zantac and stuff have dye, and so I when I was trying that, I had to find a pharmacy that could get the active ingredient. Instead of the Zantac, I got a prescription version of just the active ingredient. I don't know what the active ingredient is in Zantac, but famotidine, that's what it is. So I found a pharmacy that could get me a prescription of famotidine, so it didn't have any dye in it, and all the other crap that comes in like the over-the-counter Zantac. or like what you just buy at the drugstore. So that's a really important thing to know, and that's part of like the removing your triggers and removing toxins from your life. So for some people, a lot of chronic illness people kind of already live this toxin-free life, and so it's making these just little other adjustments. But for some people it might feel like an overhaul, and I would just say start small. Do one thing that you can do at a time, you know. Maybe it's just cleaning out your cleaning products and getting cleaner ones, and then it's switching your hair products, and then it's dealing with the medication stuff and getting dye-free versions of that. That's just an important note about medications and treating mast cell as well that I wanted to make sure I shared with you. So the big goal is modulating the immune system, because essentially your immune system is like overreacting and reacting things it shouldn't, and so you want to modulate that and help it out. And a big way to help is to balance your minerals and vitamins, detoxing, getting the right supplements for you and your body to support your immune system and to balance it. So we want to try and get the toxins out so that your immune system isn't so overloaded. We want to try and balance everything out and just calm everything down, essentially. And then IVIG actually has been used in like really, it's been shown to help with mast cell, because it's an IVIG helps modulate the immune system and kind of reset it. Dr. Afrin has used that in really extreme cases. My immunologist uses it for IVIG. Well, he's found it to help his mast cell patients, and he'll use it in really extreme mast cell cases as well. It's not like a treatment that everyone should be doing, obviously, but I just wanted to throw that in there because I think it's an interesting fun fact about IVIG, but it also makes sense because it helps modulate your immune system. All right, per usual, that was probably a lot of information, really long, but hopefully it was helpful. People keep asking me these questions, so I wanted to try and provide answers. Again, remember, I'm not a doctor. I'm simply sharing what I have learned. I'm gonna link a bunch of stuff below in the description box, so don't forget to check that out. I hope that this video was helpful. If you have more questions, of course, always leave them below and I will try and answer what I can. Again, I don't know everything and I'm still learning as well. So if there's any tips or information that you have or that I missed, or maybe that you think I didn't say right or I got wrong, please let me know again also in the comments, just so that I, you know, we can share this information with each other and help each other out, because I know part of what's great about the chronic illness community is that, you know, we all experience things differently, but somebody else may be going through a similar experience and have some tips that could be helpful for you. So definitely leave those below if you have them. Again, give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful and learned some new things about mast cells, and subscribe per usual. And I'll see you all in the next video.